Okay. Hello students, welcome to yet another lecture session on acid-base balance. Okay, we are actually in the part 5. This is the 5th lecture in the series. We have discussed many things from the beginning. We have discussed buffers, we have discussed how normal pH is maintained by lungs and kidneys, and in the last class immediately prior to this we already have discussed how to analyze arterial blood gas problems, okay, ABGs, right? Let us take this one step further. Today we will be exploring the real world scenario, how ABGs are done, arterial blood gas analysis are done. Originally this was supposed to be an early clinical exposure session where you would have been taken in small groups to ICU, right? But now we will be doing this online, okay? So let us get through it. So we are actually studying this because its competency, it's a MCI competency 6.8 says discuss and interpret results of arterial blood gas analysis in various disorders. Okay, so we need to learn everything about ABGs, how ABGs are done, that is the topic of discussion today. How to interpret ABGs, that we have already done in previous class, we will be doing today, and we will also be doing in much more detail in the next class. We will be dissecting further points that we need to know. Okay, so all about ABGs we need to know. So today's procedure, today's class is how to do it, the procedure, like how the interns and doctors and residents and critical care specialists do it in intensive care unit. Okay, so before going to the detailed procedure, first let us know why do we do ABG. So arterial blood gas analysis, right? Actually it measures blood gas tension. What is blood gas tension? Tension generally means partial pressure or pressure. Okay, when we say tension बहुत बढ़ गया, we are in much tension, means some time we also say बहुत pressure बढ़ गया दिमाग का, right? So generally by tension we mean the pressure, and for gas that is not absolute pressure, that is partial pressure, right? All right. So okay, let me ask you, how many of you have seen or have donated, or your parents or relatives have donated blood, right? Number one, for donation, blood donation, that is number one, and number two, for giving sample. Okay, sample for any routine investigation. It can be urea, it can be creatinine, it can be anything, blood glucose. So always the blood sample is drawn from cubital vein when we are drawing from arm, right? Because in the cubital fossa, the median cubital vein is the most superficial. It has got a bone in the background, hard surface, and it is much more accessible. So always we put a needle in that vein. Okay, but when we need to measure blood gas, the information by which we will get to know whether the patient is suffering from acidosis or alkalosis, vein is not a good option. We need to probe into an artery. Okay, so that is the main difference. With all blood routine sample, you cannot just do ABG because it specifically requires arterial blood. Okay, so it is minded, it is arterial blood gas analysis. It is not normal venous blood. So what does it tell us? Okay, number one, arterial partial pressure of oxygen, very important, right? So it first and foremost, it will tell us what is the oxygen partial pressure. Most important, because this is the most important parameter for which we are bothered at all with a patient in ICU. Especially nowadays, you know that it is the oxygen partial pressure and saturation that is the main concern, because we are going through a COVID pandemic, right? Next, most important, arterial partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So it is PO2 and PCO2. Both are important because PCO2 gives us much more detail about the acidosis and alkalosis status, whether it is respiratory, whether compensation is going on, everything, right? Next, pH, very important. You need to measure arterial blood gas to determine pH of the blood. Okay, you cannot put litmus paper in blood. Naturally, we cannot titrate blood with something. To know the exact pH, we need to do ABG. In ABG machine, there is an electrode for pH. So blood pH is another important parameter other than PO2 and PCO2 that can be measured by ABG. From these, okay, there are few derived parameters that can be measured. Number one is bicarbonate. Okay, so you see the three important players that we need to determine in order to evaluate the patient acidosis alkalosis status, that is pH, PCO2 and bicarbonate. All three can be measured by this single test, that is ABG, arterial blood gas analysis. Actually know this because we have been solving problems. I told you ABG problems and these three values are given. So we are doing in a reverse order. This should have been taught in the very first class. Anyway, so from all of these, see, this was the partial pressure. Okay, arterial oxygen saturation can be determined. There are formulas from which we can determine arterial oxygen saturation, and that is the most important. Ideally saturation should be 100%, right? 90, 99 still permissible. When it starts to drop, we know that there is some problem in oxygen delivery to the peripheral tissue. So lung is at a problem. So either decrease in lung function, it can be pneumonia, it can be any disease. Now especially the focus is on pneumonia due to COVID-19, but in all other cases, two things. Number one, oxygen delivery is low. Okay, oxygen is low, lung is normal, then oxygen saturation can dip, right? And number two, oxygen is normal, but the capacity of lung to absorb oxygen and deliver to the tissues, that is arterial blood, is low. So in all these two scenarios, oxygen saturation will dip. Okay. Okay, so when it is done, see, it is mainly used in, naturally it is lung function test. Primarily it is a lung function test. Definitely there are information about other systemic electrolytes. Okay, not only bicarbonate, we will see in the next class, we can actually fit electrodes in the ABG machine by which we can measure sodium, potassium, chloride. So electrolytes can also be measured, but they can also be measured separately using an ion selective electrode, ISE machine. Okay, those who have gone to central lab for a virtual, for the tour of central lab in the early clinical exposure, the previous class, you already saw sodium, potassium, chloride is done in a separate machine. However, we can do this in ABG machine, but that's not essential. Essential are these: partial pressure of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH and bicarbonate, right? It is mainly used to determine the gaseous exchange across alveolar capillary membrane. That is a no-brainer, okay? And I told you, pulmonology and critical care medicine. Why critical care medicine? Because critical care medicine can be headed, the HOD of critical care group can be anybody. It can be from anesthesia department, it can be from medicine department, it can be from surgery, orthopedics, anything. Any department can have critical care patients. Critical care patient means, what do we consider critical? Generally two organs, that not too many organs can lead to ultimately this critical care condition, but mainly number one lungs and number two heart. Generally, we dedicate a separate cardiac care unit for heart, so that is CCU, okay? And the ICU, that is intensive care unit, generally deals with lung function. So all the ventilators, everything. So ultimately everything boils down to the capacity of lung to oxygenate the body and in turn the brain. So all ICU, CCU, ICCU, PICU, that is pediatric intensive care unit, NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. Okay, there are many type of ICUs. All are focused around ventilation because lung is the main organ that we are caring about, right? So this role of ABG mainly lies in pulmonology and critical care medicine. Okay, just to give you a heads up. So the procedure, okay, how do we do ABG? Now this is to be honest, the online discussion just showing you few pics don't do justice to the procedure, okay? Unless you are taken to a ward or ICU setting, unless you are shown how exactly this arterial blood is drawn, generally it tends to deregister out of your memory, right? But still I'll try to make it as much virtually visualizable. Let's see. So what it needs, An ABG requires a small volume of blood to be drawn into a vial from the radial artery with a heparinized syringe. First, see what the statement says. Okay, from radial artery with a heparinized syringe to prevent coagulation and a thin needle, but sometimes a femoral artery in the groin or another site is used. The blood can be drawn from arterial catheter. There are many things, many information over here, right? First is, arterial blood and venous blood, they differ a lot in color, right? Arterial blood is bright red in color, right? And venous blood is dark red in color. Okay. Okay, let me show you. Okay, this is how arterial blood looks like. I'm not kidding. This will be the actual color of arterial blood. It's as bright red as anything. Okay, this is artery. Okay, ekdam red, bright red, right? And how do venous blood looks like? Well, in all reality, even when not this much, venous blood looks like this. Okay, this is actual venous blood, the blood that we already see in movies. Okay, even if haath kat gaya, any bleeding, any scratches, we all see this blood. This is dark red. Okay, so this is venous blood, and the one that I showed you before, this one, ye wala ho gaya arterial blood. Okay, so don't forget, when you try okay, let's forget the procedure. When you are a senior, when you go to ward, okay, when you are asked to draw blood for ABG, okay, if you somehow draw blood, if you are confident that you have tapped into any artery, okay, you draw the syringe and you see, you get this dark red colored blood, immediately discard. Okay, because this is venous blood. If you insert the whole thing into ABG machine, or if you try to analyze, you will get the wrong result, right? So you must make sure that you get these bright red blood. This is the first thing to note. Okay, so what we are discussing, first you need to draw blood from artery, and we saw the arterial blood is very bright red in color, right? And then you need a very thin syringe. The syringe can be 2 ml or 1 ml, okay, syringe, not your big 5 milliliter syringe, no, minimum 2 ml or 1 ml syringe, right? With that, you need to tap into the artery. One superficial artery that we always prefer is radial artery, right? Because radial artery is over here in front of the styloid process of radius, okay, that's the bony support behind it. So against the styloid process of radius, you can always palpate the radial artery, right? So you need to make sure, you need to first fix your finger on top of the radial artery. Okay, generally it is done with 3 fingers, right? So with 2 fingers we milk the radial artery. Okay, we suppose this is the artery, we feel with 3 fingers. Okay, then the index finger and the ring finger is slided in proximal and distal way, just like this. Okay, and with the middle finger we try to feel the radial artery, just like you feel radial pulse, right? After that, what we do, we need to make sure that we probe the needle absolutely beside our finger. The main thing is, you need to make sure you are hitting the radial artery, you are not missing it, okay? Because there are many superficial veins in and around this area. If you tap into the veins, you will get dark red blood. So the first and foremost challenge is to locate the radial artery, to palpate the radial artery, and to prick the radial artery so that you get the arterial blood. Generally, one trick is used. First, the needle is inserted, okay, absolutely vertically. Then you apply a suction and then you slowly withdraw the needle. This is the actual procedure how we do it. Okay, first we insert the needle, we apply suction, and you withdraw the needle. At some point of time, the needle will be inside the radial artery and bright red blood will come out in the syringe. Okay, sometimes it may happen you insert the needle and it pierces both the walls and it goes past the radial artery, right? So that is the reason why we apply suction and we keep withdrawing it. Okay, then at some time, okay, see, this is what happens. Suppose this is the radial artery. okay, and we are inserting a needle through and through. Suppose the needle has gone past the radial artery, okay, but you try to apply suction at some point of time. So now your needle is going up, okay, you are withdrawing the needle. At some point of time the needle will be inside the arterial bore or lumen. At that point of time it will be the blood will definitely come out in the syringe, but there is a requirement prior to you insert your needle, okay. What you need to do, you need to make sure that this blood doesn't clot, number one, because this is a very precious blood, okay. Generally artery tapping is a much required skill. Maybe you won't be able to do it, maybe your seniors will do it, so you can't do it all the time. When you need to send blood sample for venous blood as an intern, you can do it all the time, but not ABG. Generally ABG, arterial tap, is done under supervision of seniors, so he might not be available all the time. So you need to make sure that this blood has got a tendency to clot very fast, right? So you need to add an anticoagulant. How do you add anticoagulant? Normally when we draw venous blood, what we do, we draw blood in the syringe and we push the blood into vials, okay, and that vials have got anticoagulant. So there is some time for us to withdraw the blood, to deposit in the container, then we shake the container so that the anticoagulant gets mixed properly, right? However, even that time is not available for arterial blood gas analysis. So after anticoagulant, I mean adding anticoagulant after withdrawing is not an option. So you need to pre-coagulate the syringe, and the best anticoagulant that is recommended is heparin. So you need to mix heparin in the syringe. How do we do it? This is known as heparinization of the syringe. What do we do? Simply heparin is actually available as a liquid, okay. We simply draw heparin in the syringe, okay, from the vial, and then again we push back heparin into the vial. In the process, the walls of the syringe are coated by heparin, and that is enough to prevent blood clot, okay. So remember, heparinization of a syringe means we draw heparin from a vial, and then again we push back the heparin. So you don't need to take 1 ml of heparin like that. No, you can absolutely push back the syringe in such a way so that nothing is remaining. Even then, the amount of heparin that has stuck to the wall, coating the syringe inner wall, is sufficient, okay. So heparinized syringe to prevent blood clot, right? Then with a thin needle, okay, so we are talking about radial artery first, right? But there may be cases, for example, in case of burn, okay, suppose the area is burnt, okay, anatomy is lost, or in case of any amputation, right, or any plaster, okay, so that you don't have any access to the radial artery, then we choose another superficial artery that is actually very much easy to palpate, that is femoral artery, okay. In the femoral triangle, we know femoral artery, vein and nerve are in a relation, so we palpate, and that is known as femoral tap, okay. We expose the inguinal region, and this is the actual landmark, 1 centimeter medial to the artery and 2 to 3 centimeter inferior to the inguinal ligament. It's an anatomical landmark. When you do it, you know it, okay. Just by memorizing this thing, it's not good enough, because the location of artery may be slightly different for different patients. So we first palpate the femoral artery. Question over here is, who is lateral artery and who is medial, that is the vein, okay. So we try, whenever, see, femoral vein, okay, the word I use, femoral tap, generally it is used for drawing blood from femoral vein. Similarly, we may need venous blood even if the arm is amputated for normal reason, okay, normal routine procedure. In that case, the femoral triangle becomes a location of choice to draw blood for both venous and arterial samples. So whenever we are drawing blood, we intend to draw venous blood, we tend to draw more medially, okay, and whenever we tend to draw arterial blood, we tend to draw more laterally, okay. That is one anatomical clue. And number 2, when you draw blood, you will see whether it is bright red or dark red, so you get an idea, right? So another site may be behind the medial malleolus, that is arteria dorsalis pedis. You will know if your inferior extremity has been covered yet, okay. So these are the superficial arteries that we target in order to draw arterial blood. So number 1, heparinized syringe, okay. Number 2, we need to locate and draw the blood from either femoral or radial artery. Okay, there is something known as arterial catheter. These are the procedure when we are directly inserting needle and we are drawing blood. Okay, sometimes there is something known as central line. Okay, generally central line is venous line. Okay, central venous line, but for some reason arterial catheters are also inserted. Catheter means a sheath, a pipe, a very thin line that is already inserted in the artery. We can use that line to draw blood from artery, but that is extremely rare and very few indications are there for arterial catheterization, right? So number one do is always use heparinized syringe. Okay, number two do is always try to first anatomically locate the artery and then palpate and then tap. Okay, number three do is always make sure the blood is bright red. Okay, otherwise it is not arterial blood, it is venous blood, right? So here comes few don'ts. Okay, what are the don'ts? Number one don't is make sure you it can be a do or it can be a don't. Okay, make sure there is no air bubble, right? Generally when we draw blood or we draw any fluid, what we do, we tend to draw in excess and there are some air bubble in the syringe, and then we make sure we push the syringe and then the air bubbles are set free. Okay, we do this prior to giving an injection and we do this prior to putting the blood sample in the vial, right? When drawing arterial blood, you must be absolutely careful. Number one, not to draw any air bubble, that will be the best thing, and even if there are air bubbles, you should eliminate them as fast as you can. So no air bubble. We say air bubbles are error bubble, right? Why? We are measuring arterial blood gas, means whatever oxygen, whatever carbon dioxide is present in our physiology in the dissolved state in blood, we are trying to get an accurate information about those things. If atmospheric air bubbles are mixed with the blood, the data about the dissolved oxygen and carbon dioxide will simply change, because the oxygen and carbon dioxide from air bubble will also get dissolved in the blood. Okay, so that will give a wrong information. So make sure there is no air bubble. So what to do to eliminate air bubble? Okay, and don't make sure there is no air bubble. Okay, so either this is a do or don't, right? Next one don't is, okay, so air bubble is done. Okay, next the sealed syringe is taken to blood gas analyzer. Okay, and the sample should be transported and kept at room temperature and analyzed within 30 minutes. These are very two important things, right? So the syringe is sealed and it is directly inserted in the blood gas analyzer. See, this is an ABG machine. Normally, in case of other routine blood samples, what do? We transfer the blood sample into a vial, right? And from the vial, we use pipette to draw serum and put it in the autoanalyzer machine. There are containers that is known as sample cups. But in case of ABG machine, we can't allow that, because while transferring the thing into the vial, it may clot, air will get mixed. When transferring it with pipette, everything will lead to air contamination. So we, in order to minimize the contamination with dissolved air, the system remains pretty closed. So the syringe is itself directly inserted into the ABG machine, and ABG machines are made as such that the syringe nozzle will fit directly into the receiving section. Okay, thereafter there is a touch screen. Simple, we just need to enter patient data and we need to choose the parameters. Suppose you need to measure pH, bicarbonate, PCO2, chloride, sodium. You just enter and automatically this syringe will get sucked in and a printout will come from the top, which will give you all the data in a strip of paper that we are actually analyzing as our cases, right? So this is number one, do. You should always seal the syringe, don't transfer the blood into any vial. Okay, and next don't or do is always analyze the syringe, blood sample within 30 minutes. What will be the don't? Don't prolong the analysis beyond 30 minutes, right? Why do we say this? Generally, ABG machines are known as POCT. Okay, what is POCT? It stands for point of care testing. Point of care testing means where we are giving care to the patient, that is bed, okay, we are testing the value at the bedside only, okay. That is why these ABG machines are placed inside ICUs, whereas all other parameters are checked at central lab. So imagine what happens. Normally what happens, an intern or a doctor will come and draw blood sample. Those blood samples are grouped together. Some group D staff or any AYA or any mashis, okay, they will take the blood sample together and they will deposit in the central lab. In central lab there is a receiving section. From there the sample gets processed and they go to the analysis section. Their analysis is done and then report goes back to the report section, and then in the evening that intern or the group D attendant will go to collect all the reports, right? Or even they can see it online, okay, but it takes time. So there are multiple steps involved in case of routine parameter analysis. However, this is critical. ABG is a critical care parameter, so we cannot wait for the blood sample to be taken to ICU, I mean to be taken to central lab, right? So you draw blood and you get it tested right there, okay. However, you know what, in many cases, even in normal wards, in general wards, patient may land up into coma, right? So from there, what we do, if there is a need for ABG analysis in routine patients, normally what happens now is COVID crisis, okay, ICU beds are filled up, even in general beds, patients are getting admitted, right? And most of them have got respiratory acidosis. How do we confirm that? There is no ABG machine in general bed. It is not possible because these need cool atmosphere. We need AC. We need constant monitoring. We need constant follow-up, troubleshooting, right? So this machine needs taken care by expert professional. That is only possible inside ICU. So what do? We draw blood at the bedside in case of general bed, right? And we immediately take the syringe to the ICU, get it analyzed, and then we get back the report and come back to general ward. So everything should happen within 30 minutes, right? So in other cases, you know what happens? A blood is drawn. It may happen a blood is drawn in the morning and एक साथ सुबह एक को draw किया, and ultimately full day, after full day when all 20-30 patient blood is drawn, we send the sample together. So a blood sample that is drawn in the morning can be analyzed in the evening, right? Or a blood sample that is drawn in the night, we keep it overnight in fridge and then we send in the morning. Those practices are not allowed in case of arterial blood gas analysis. See, it is kept at room temperature and should be analyzed within 30 minutes. If 30 minutes is over, we need to repeat arterial tap, right? Because the blood gas analysis will be, the information will be wrong, okay? You might be wondering, is there any harm if in case of other routine parameters, suppose blood glucose. In case of blood glucose, we draw blood right now and we send for glucose analysis in the evening. So will there be any change in blood glucose? Definitely there will be change, because by then all the RBCs will utilize the blood glucose because there will be continuous glycolysis, right? So there is an applied question over there. In order to prevent this, we use sodium fluoride in the vial for blood glucose, okay? Sodium fluoride inhibits enolase enzyme. Enolase is a enzyme of glycolysis. So all those applied part, I think it has been discussed in carbohydrate metabolism, the applied question, why sodium fluoride is used in glucose estimation. Don't worry, if it has not been covered, I will again explain my type of questions in a separate class dedicated from all chapters. So you don't need to worry. The main thing is it should be analyzed within 30 minutes, right? So what are the indications? Indications means why do we do it? Okay, for example, now RT-PCR, what is the indication of RT-PCR? Any disease, any fever for more than, in this season, any fever is an indication to do RT-PCR, okay? Number one. Number two, when you are traveling, okay, you are traveling interstate, then you need to do RT-PCR in order to show that you are negative, right? So that is known as indication, when you do it, right? So an indication for ABG is generally any critical illness or respiratory disease, right? So it is one of the most common tests that is performed in an ICU. Whenever a patient lands up in ICU, the very first thing, of course, it is the line for saline, etc. are being set up. We attach cardiac monitors, we attach ECG, everything. But we always, first thing we do is we do an arterial tap. We get the ABGs done. Okay. So that is an indication. Now, is there any alternative method? Definitely. Okay, there is an alternative method when ICU setup is not available, or in peripheral medical colleges or in peripheral hospitals, when you don't have an access to ICU, don't have ABG machine, you don't have skilled person to do arterial tap, then we use transcutaneous method. It is less sensitive, but it will still give some information. Okay, right now we know this pulse oximeter. 2 to 3 years since I've been teaching this, the moment I show this slide, many students are like, meh, what is this? But now, I won't say thanks, but courtesy COVID, most of us know how a pulse oximeter looks like. Okay, this is how situation may change any day, right? So what we use nowadays from internet, from Flipkart, from Amazon, we are buying pulse oximeter to see oxygen saturation. Okay, similarly, this uses the principle of infrared reflectance photometry. Oh, my handwriting is abysmal in this digital pen. So this infrared reflectance photometry, it can give information about all the dissolved gases. So generally, when we use single information, that is oxygen only, it is pulse oximeter. Okay, similarly transcutaneous carbon dioxide measurement can also be done. Okay, remember bicarbonate cannot be measured. For that we need to draw venous blood and do bicarbonate separately, right? Okay, but still in a non-invasive method this can be done by transcutaneous method, and just like pulse oximetry. Okay, now we already told you what are the parameters that can be measured. Okay, now the parameters that can be measured are: number one, pH. Basically pH means information about H plus. Okay, H plus pH is negative log of hydrogen ion concentration, and then all the partial pressure of the gases. So it can be a partial pressure of oxygen, carbon dioxide, the lung partial pressure of oxygen, the arterial partial pressure of oxygen, everything depending on where from we are taking. Anyway, see, this is alveolar and this is arterial. Okay, there are formulas by which from a single information we can derive one another. Okay, and these are the direct parameters. These are the gaseous electrodes are available for oxygen, carbon dioxide and pH. Okay, something using these we can derive others. What are the others we can derive? See, pH equals to pK plus log of bicarbonate by PCO2. We already know that. What is 6.1? 6.1 is the pKa of bicarbonate buffer that we have already discussed. So using this formula, if we know the pH, we know the pK, we know the PaCO2, indirectly we can measure bicarbonate. Okay, so by measuring bicarbonate is actually very easy. It is a calculation that is based on the formula. Okay. Next, other parameters, for example, anion gap, base excess. We'll be discussing anion gap in much detail in the next class. These can also be measured. So this is the formula of anion gap. Okay, sodium plus potassium minus chloride and bicarbonate. Okay, you know, to measure anion gap we need to measure the sodium, potassium, chloride as well, and these can be measured using ABG, using separate electrodes. This is the formula of base excess. These are nice to know areas. If you cannot say what is base excess, how base excess is measured, examiner will not penalize you, never. Okay? So basically what we need to know is, we get many parameters, we get many information from ABG. Okay, these are direct information. Using these one after another we can derive others. Okay, so what are the common acid base disorders? Okay, let us recap. So this is done. What you need to do in ABG, what you don't need to do in ABG, how you do ABG, and why we do ABG. Okay, so let us recap all the diseases. Okay, so all the four we will revise. Metabolic acidosis. Okay, metabolic acidosis, the common causes of metabolic acidosis are diabetic ketoacidosis, any fixed acid production. Okay, lactic acidosis, diarrhea. Why in diarrhea metabolic acidosis happen? It is because the lower GI fluid is rich in alkaline fluid. So a lot of alkalis are lost in diarrhea. It will lead to an unbalanced acid in the body. So diarrhea is another cause of metabolic acidosis. And definitely these have names in them, acidosis names. So it is definitely metabolic acidosis. Okay. Metabolic alkalosis, what are the cause? Prolonged vomiting, nasogastric suction, means any upper GI fluid loss. Upper GI fluid has got a lot of acid, HCl. So when upper GI fluid is lost, either it is lost by suction or it is lost by prolonged vomiting, it will lead to an unbalanced alkali in the system and it will lead to metabolic alkalosis. Okay. And diuretic therapy. Diuretic therapy is one thing that you need to memorize right now, because the principle of diuretic therapy will be taught in second year pharmacology, and then you will understand why diuretic therapy can lead to alkalosis. Okay, these two are enough for you as a first year student. Okay. Next, respiratory acidosis. What happens in respiratory acidosis? Lungs cannot wash out carbon dioxide, means hypoventilation. So any restrictive lung disease or breathing problem, having difficulty to breathe, what are them? Asthma, COPD, in all of them, okay, the carbon dioxide is held up, it cannot be washed out. Okay, so concentration of carbon dioxide increases in lungs and subsequently it is gone to blood, and then PCO2 rises, it will lead to respiratory acidosis. So any cause of hypoventilation, when breathing rate is there is breathing problem. Okay. And the reverse is in respiratory alkalosis, means hyperventilation, excess CO2 is washed out. When can it happen? In case of high altitude sickness, in case of any anxiety attack, anxiety, okay, panic attack, or salicylate poisoning. So all these will lead to respiratory alkalosis. Again, salicylate poisoning, the mechanism of salicylate poisoning will be taught in second year. These two, drug uretic therapy and salicylate poisoning. Why I am telling you? Because you may find this in your textbook, but please don't utter them in exam. Okay, please don't. This is a don't that you need to know for exam perspective. Always say hyperventilation, high altitude sickness, anxiety, panic attack, in which breathing rate is increased and CO2 is washed out. Okay. So now that we know all these common acid base disorders, so what is the point in knowing all this? We need to solve acid base problems, and we can do that from the data. Definitely we can do that, but if you have these disorders in mind, you can start thinking of an acid base disorder right from the history, even before looking at the data, just as I taught you. So let us look into this. Okay. Often there may not be the information from this, okay, because this is a very limited list just for first year student. There are multiple reasons, I mean 20 to 30 reasons for each of these disorder that you don't need to know as a first year student. Okay, so let's see this one. A 60-year-old man with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, it's a neurological disorder, forget it, just a distractor, is brought to the clinic by family who are concerned that he is more somnolent than normal. Somnolence means sleep-like state, means he is more sleepy, okay, than normal. On further history, they report as he is having problems with morning headache and doesn't feel very refreshed when he wakes up. So basically there is no specific history, okay, everything is vague. So we do an ABG, what happens? pH 7.37, PCO2 57, PO2 70. This is PO2, right? Mind you, this is not oxygen saturation. If PO2 is, if oxygen saturation is 70, patient is gone, almost gone, and bicarbonate is 32. Okay. So what is your diagnosis? You can solve it mentally if you know the normal value. Let me tell you, normal value of pH is 7.35 to 7.45. Okay. The value of carbon dioxide is 36 to 44. Okay, and the value of bicarbonate is 22 to 26. Okay. So what is the disorder over here? See, generally this problem I took because it has been directly taken from an AIIMS MCQ. Okay. However, at your level, you see this is pH 7.37 is actually normal, right? So during that time, the question paper setter actually thought that the normal pH is 7.4, so this is a bit low. Okay, you can make it 7.27 for your convenience. Okay, when it is 7.27, it is much more explainable from your perspective. Okay, so what is the acid base status? Okay, so considering 7.27, the pH is low, definitely, that is acidemia. Okay, consider 7.27, not 37. Okay, next, there are two conditions over here. What is going on over here? See, bicarbonate is high, definitely there is metabolic alkalosis, and PCO2 is also high, that is respiratory acidosis. So who is corroborating to the low pH? Definitely not bicarbonate. Okay, so it has to be done by PCO2 only. So the low combination, I mean the low pH in combination with high PCO2 tells us this is a case of respiratory acidosis. Okay, that is the primary disorder. And what is bicarbonate doing? The bicarbonate is actually compensating the disorder. Okay, so you see what actually has happened here. If we consider a pH of 7.37, first the pH went down a lot. It went down a lot due to respiratory acidosis, and then bicarbonate has increased. Okay, and it has brought back the pH to normal level. So it is a full compensation. Okay, when a pH is less but still the parameter is not abnormal, there is compensation, but that is partial compensation. This is a case of full compensation. If you don't look at all these parameters, you will see, okay, this is a normal patient. But when you look at these parameters, you see, wow, PCO2 is so high, bicarbonate is so high, means there is some problem going on in spite of the pH looking normal. So the answer to that MCQ would have been, it is a case of fully compensated respiratory acidosis, or respiratory acidosis with fully compensated metabolic alkalosis. Okay, so remember, whenever the pH is normal but there is acid base disorder, that is, we are talking about full compensation, right? In earlier class we discussed about partial compensation. Okay, this is a case of respiratory acidosis with compensatory metabolic alkalosis, full compensation. Okay, so one last problem with which we will end our class. See, a climber is climbing down from summit of Mount Everest. Okay, an altitude of 8400 meter, ABG was done. Okay, so our first clue is high altitude. What happens in high altitude? Let us see. High altitude sickness. Okay, so your first clue even before looking is respiratory alkalosis. So now let us look, is this a case of respiratory alkalosis? Okay, so pH reveals 7.55, so definitely it is alkalosis. Okay, PCO2 12, PO2 30, and bicarbonate 10.5. So what is happening over here? What is the acid base status? The patient has high pH, no doubt about that. It is alkalemia, okay, or alkalosis. Next, again there are two problems that is happening. If you look at the PCO2 and if you look at the bicarbonate, PCO2 low means respiratory alkalosis, okay, and bicarbonate is low means metabolic acidosis. If we just, why bicarbonate is generally low? Because there is metabolic acidosis. Okay, so over here, who is contributing likely to the change in pH? Definitely it is alkalosis, because there is alkalosis in the system. Okay, so the high value of pH in conjunction with low PCO2, we always told you pH and PCO2 goes in opposite direction. Okay, that tells us this is a case of respiratory alkalosis. That is the primary one. Okay, however, this has not been compensated. Had it been compensated, it should have been below, I mean within 7.45. So this is the metabolic acidosis is a compensatory process, but it is partial. Okay, so what is the answer? The answer is primary respiratory alkalosis with partially compensated metabolic, or with partial metabolic compensation. Okay, so I hope this was enough for you. You now know what is ABG, how ABG is done, and please let me know in the comment section if you have any problem regarding these two problems. You can take a screenshot of these two problems and you can then solve it on your own. Okay, I will just rub the whole thing. Okay, I'll just discard and I will again restart. Okay, so you can just take a look at the problems. You just take a screenshot. This is problem number 1. Okay, I hope you took the screenshot, and this is problem number 2. Okay, so in the next class we'll be solving some more problems, and we'll be discussing some more important aspects on how you can say whether this case has acute or chronic problem, whether there is any mixed disorder or not. But that is a lesson for next class. Feel free to get back to me in the comment section, and I will see you soon with another video. Till then, bye and take care.